If you've been deferring all that income now to this point and you show up with, say, like $2 million in an IRA thinking like I'm golden, you may or may not be, depending on how much you need from that portfolio. What's up, buddy?
Scott, good to see you.
Yeah, we're not in office today.
We are not.
We're in the mobile office.
That's right.
Yeah, at the beach.
At the beach, summertime's here, a little different background. I think I like it a little better.
Me too, man. Well, today we are going to talk to you guys about something that happens for us all the time when people come in. Kind of what they're thinking about under the surface. This thing that they want to know. Fidelity did a really good job of making people think, or a couple of companies have done people think, have done a good job to make it think it's the thing you need to focus on.
Right.
What's my number?
Everyone's obsessed with a number, but oftentimes it's deeper than that. There's a thing beneath the thing, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
Totally. So, the what's my number makes sense for a lot of people. It's a simple idea. I can think, how much money do I need to retire? Give me that number, Nick, and I can go focus on achieving that. But there's certainly some things that lie beneath that number. So, outside of, do I need 2 million or 3 million to retire? There's so much underneath that. So how about we just chat that through, what people show up kind of thinking about, and then what we think they also need to think about.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that. I think, to your point too, it's easy, it's measurable. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. You give us this number, we're going to go run towards the goal. But oftentimes, as we find as planners, depending on how, right? How being the big variable there of how and where we solve for saving for that number, there's things that maybe that study from different bigger institutions hasn't covered, hasn't gone into depth for, and that's what we're going to dive into.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the point, right? It's a simple thing to look at, but there's obviously complexity under that simple number. So, the things that, there's the things that most people come in thinking about, or at least they have some semblance of an idea of things they need to think about. Like, they want to have their number they can retire. We usually start with, well, what do you spend today?
Pretty easy to back into, right?
Yeah, we need to have a sense of what your spend is. And then they often will bring up things like, well, I might need to buy a car every so many years, or
this is where I want to travel to, or so-and-so son, daughter is getting married, and we want to make sure to contribute to that. Whatever the personal goal is, there's things that are, they like to call lumpy or one-off expenses that are just different than month to month.
Right. And so we think about those all the time as well. And we definitely build those into plans. But that oftentimes that's where I've seen for a lot of clients, it's not to say all people, because some people are really into geeking out on this stuff. That's normally where their knowledge kind of ends, and the things that we're trying to add on are helpful.
We've seen all the spreadsheets, so hey, did we remember to factor this in? And so I think, diving into it today is like, what are the things that we're not thinking about? But what I'd like to also talk about too is, if we're listening to this and honestly, I don't think it's ever too early to start, but yeah, generally speaking, where we start to really kind of hone in on this is when we're in our mid 40s, late 40s, early 50s, thinking, okay, how can I optimize this? Because chances are you're probably already doing a great job saving, and now we're just trying to figure out, let's look at a broader lens or filter here.
Yeah.
Or let's start looking beyond that.
Yeah. So if we can go there to begin with, one of the things that we'll look at right away is we'll look at, great that you've saved, and we'll look at the question of, where have you saved?
What do you mean by that? Like, where? Like, of course, like I have my 401k.
Yep. So sometimes I think of that as like your asset mix, or maybe asset location could be a word for that. But like, what types of accounts are your assets in that you're going to use to live in retirement?
And some people just think like they don't even know, potentially, like retirement, maybe it's an IRA, 401k. They don't know anything beyond that.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So like we've talked about on the show before, IRAs and 401ks are a great place to save for retirement. And they do allow us to potentially defer taxes now, or we could choose to turn them into a Roth now. But if you've been deferring all that income now to this point, and you show up with, say, like $2 million in an IRA thinking like I'm golden, you may or may not be, depending on how much you need from that portfolio. Because essentially what you've done is you built an asset that is now worth $2 million. But some portion of that actually belongs to the federal government and the state government, wherever you hang out. Because when you take the money out, it's going to be taxed.
So I'm laughing because I'm looking at where we're filming this today.
Right.
And that's going to be a bigger tax bite from our account from $2 million because of state taxes.
Right. So like the common tax in the state of California is 9.3%, goes up to 13.3%. So you could have a really large amount coming out in taxes. So another way you could think of it is, of that $2 million, 10% of that belongs to the state of California.
Yep. Or what are we going to say? 15 to 20, 25 at least belongs to Uncle Sam and the federal government.
Right. So something like that. But then, so one thing we might look at if you have a long time until retirement is you might look to save to other accounts that you can then be more nimble with your withdrawals when they occur. So one thing we'll look at is, well, what percentage of your assets are sitting all in tax deferred accounts? What percentage are sitting in accounts like Roths? And what percentage are sitting in just traditional taxable brokerage accounts? Because if we have, ideally you have something like a third, and a third when you don't know what the future tax law is, because then you have the ability to be really dynamic with your planning.
That's what I like to look at too, is like, and it's not to discourage anyone from saving into the pre-tax. It's saying, how can we start to look beyond retirement, age 60, 65, 70, right? These 401ks, IRAs, pre-tax assets. There's going to be a time, whether or not we need the money, where we're going to be required to take that money out. So to Scott's point, a third helps us figure out, well, at 50, where do we want to take our first distribution or dollar from? But that may look different in our 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, what so many people often overlook is, yeah, we got that $2 million. But if we're looking at what we give to Uncle Sam and whatever state we're in, maybe it's now closer to $1.5, $1.6 million once we factor in taxes. And so having, we'll call it the three legs of the stool, right? Very common example. Having some money spread out elsewhere can really help smooth out the ride when it comes to paying less in taxes and getting strategic about it.
Yeah, which is the next thing we'll pay attention to, is going to be like your taxes, not only in the year that you're in now, maybe while you're still working and getting ready to retire, but also looking and planning for the years in which you're not going to have as much income because you're going to stop working, or maybe just do some consulting and bring down your tax bracket. And then eventually you're going to have that $2 million. If you're, let's say you have $2 million saved and you're in your early 50s now, maybe you're 53 and you have 20 more years for it to grow. Well, if you just double it every 10 years, which is a 7% rate of return on that money, the 2 turns to 4, the 4 turns to 8. And now you have really big. So it'd be like 75 grand times 4. So it'd be like, I think that's the quick math. I don't have a calc in front of me, but it'd be something like that. It would be somewhere around 300 grand of RMDs. So now you're in a really high tax bracket. So we basically want to look at, how do we optimize all of those years from a tax perspective, not for each year that you're in to be the lowest of that year, but to make it so the lifetime of taxes is as low as it can be, or lower than it otherwise would be if you just paid attention to each year.
Yeah, and we're throwing all this at you right now, saying if we're again in our 40s, 50s, these are great conversations and things to think about, to ponder before we retire, because so many times we've seen great savers come into both of our offices and it's too late. They're already in their 60s, they're actively in distribution mode, and now we got a tax bill to kind of wrestle through and figure out how we're going to maneuver around that. And so having that conversation of, hey, here's our savings rate, now let's figure out where we're going to save, because that gets into the next point, which is, well, you gotta have some health insurance coverage in retirement.
Yeah,
and
totally.
If we're before the age of 65, well, you gotta go to the open care marketplace.
Yeah, and I've actually had a lot of folks come in who will be worried about going from paying, their employers largely paying for health insurance, and they'll in their mind think, I can't retire before because I'll have to pay for all this healthcare and it's going to be so expensive.
They just don't know. They've never ran the numbers. They just hear it, right?
Well, but even they'll just hear it. They'll go hear that, like, for a family, a couple in their late 50s, early 60s to be on a traditional plan is going to be something like $2,000, $3,000 a month.
Right.
That might be the answer, but that's not always the answer. And we actually find that more often than not is not the answer, but there needs to be planning involved with that.
Oh, absolutely. And especially even in light of current legislation through the One Big Beautiful Bill, there are some changes that are still working through the pipeline right now of the premium tax credits and how that changes. But what we're getting at is, to Scott's point, it may not always be as expensive as once you were either quoted or thought, when we could then figure out, well, where is the money coming from? How are we going to pay from it? Do we need to take it from our 401k, IRA, pre-tax assets, which is all taxable as ordinary income? Or could we take it from a brokerage account, which is capital gains, depending on where you take it within your brokerage account, or do we have cash saved up, set aside already?
Or have you been saving to a health savings account,
Ooh,
which you could find premiums
Yes, you can.
to a health savings account. So there's all kinds of answers, but it's just looking at that next layer to figure that out. And all of those answers basically tie back to taxes and tie back to withdrawal strategies, which help us understand what your number actually needs to be.
Absolutely.
Because if you go to the simplest version, again, if we just make it a really simple, you have $2 million and we go, okay, you can withdraw. I'm going to make up a number, 4%. So you take 80 grand out of an IRA. That's before taxes. So now you go figure out what you can have after taxes on that, right? But if instead we build it so that you have it in Roth and in IRA and in taxable, now we can probably be much more nimble with the tax code and help you get to keep more of that money for yourself.
Yeah, because so many people will talk about the power of a Roth IRA, and we're never going to touch it. We're going to let that thing grow tax-free for as long as possible. But to your point, being nimble, what if we need to use some of it at 59, 60, just to get us underneath our tax brackets, or specifically for premium healthcare tax credits, or when we're on Medicare, IRMA, right? These income-related Medicare adjustments, where we have to pay more for our healthcare premiums because our income's higher. This idea to say, well, okay, if we could flirt with this line and stay under, let's pull a little bit of our assets from our brokerage or our Roths just to stay under that threshold. And now we're getting more affordable healthcare coverage, or we're in a lower tax bracket.
I'm going to apologize for Nick. He got super geeky about IRMA. I explained what it is, but all that it means in plain English is that you have to pay into the Medicare system. It's not free.
True.
And you pay in based on what your tax return was 2 years ago. So one of the things we have to look at is the work that we're doing this year going to cause you to pay more in premiums 2 years from now? And that has to be built into the calculus of, does this move make sense?
True. And sometimes people don't know as well, because when they're getting their Social Security checks, it's taken from that automatically. You have the choice.
Right.
And so oftentimes we'll get clients that have had a life event, whether they sell a house, sell a business, do a Roth conversion, whatever it is, it spikes up their income.
Yep.
And they ask, hey, why is my Social Security lower?
Yeah. You know, another thing that I think, and we probably end on this one for today, because I don't have too much all the time in the world, but another thing we'll think about often, I know you and I both, is we'll think about for your number, one of the biggest expenses that you're going to have in your retirement years is going to happen in the last year or two of your retirement. And it's some form of long-term care. And that has to be baked into your plan. So we definitely want to build that in.
Yeah, and I like looking at, whether it's long-term care, just having that conversation somewhere in our 50s or 60s. So again, just like knowing our number, just like understanding what to say, where money's coming from, with anticipating some of these costs, having that conversation in advance to figure out, should we get long-term care? How would we fund it? What would it cover? Just to be able to factor that in well in advance.
Absolutely. And another thing you can do there is, that's where there's so many different ways to solve it.
Yeah.
If you've been saving to a health savings account for years, you might choose to let some of that keep ballooning while you're using a lot of it to pay for current expenses as well. But so that some of it could be available for big expenses that are medically related, because it's tax-free when you get to take the withdrawal. But again, it comes down to where are your assets, what's the location, and what makes the most sense for you specifically. And I think the thing I would end on is, a lot of us, when we do this initial planning, even as advisors, a couple comes in, you run the analysis for them as married filing jointly, right? And you just think they're going to be fine. But it's man, if one of them passes, all of a sudden their tax rate just skyrocketed on them.
Their income could be missing now because of Social Security. One's gone.
Income could be missing, but if their RMDs are large, they're paying a lot more in taxes.
Nothing ever stays the same.
There's just so much to work through. Yeah. So yes, know your number, but know that there's things to look at underneath it. And actually, if you're interested in what's your number, you can click below for how much do I need to retire quiz. Just answer a few questions and we'll get back to you with what we've seen based on what you submitted. But if you have any questions, let us know, and we would love to answer your questions if you have them. So send them on in. We'll answer them for you. Anything else for today?
No, that's what we're here for. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We can nerd out. I've had 2 coffees. The beach is here. They're loving the new background. So send us your questions. We'd love to be a resource.
Bye, guys.